Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video and talk about this subject that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by the channel known as Club Shay Shay, who I think that I'm going to start reviewing a little bit more, at least depending on the segment or who's brought on there. Because, of course, for those of you that don't know, the man on the left, that is Mr. Shannon Sharp. Shannon Sharp, of course, he's probably more well known now for, being a sports interviewer or, being a sports personality on ESPN First Take now with Stephen A. Smith. And, of course, formerly, I believe, on First Things First with Skip Bayless. I personally believe that the rapport between himself and Skip Bayless was better than himself and Stephen A. Smith. But, I mean, they're still two great, sports personalities. But point being, Shannon Sharp, of course, being one of the all-time great athletes within his particular sport when he was a tight end, I believe, back in the 90s, and, of course, the early 2000s with the Denver Broncos and a slight tenure with the Baltimore Ravens. Of course, and on top of that, with the popularity that he gained with a certain amount of people with his sports personality on certain networks with Fox Sports 1 and also that of ESPN, he has a certain amount of athletes or certain celebrities that end up coming on his show. Well, recently, of course, he ended up having Mr. Terence Crawford on his show to talk about the potentiality of the Canelo Alvarez fight, which pretty much seems all but sealed to happen as long as Canelo Alvarez, of course, is able to pull his end of the bargain and beat William Skull, I believe, on that of a May 3rd. But we'll see what ends up happening. But anyways, let's get into it. I don't want to make this intro super long. I'll say all the information that I think I need to, with the information that presents itself. Just thought that this video would be very particularly interesting. But what I will state is that Terence Crawford says something about Canelo Alvarez that I've also been stating all along, which is that Canelo Alvarez is not just a man with Terence Crawford that just has power. He's also a greatly skilled boxer. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what the gentleman have to say.
In September, are you gonna pull this? I shook up the world. I told you. I told you. I told you. I told you. I told you.
Definitely. That's definitely gonna be, one of the moments, And I just smile,
Right.
because a lot of the people that personally know me, they know. They like, man, I don't know why they doubting that boy,
Right.
And it's cool, but I need that.
Right.
I need the doubters to fuel me. I need the people to say, oh, well, look at his fight against Majimov. What you think he'd do if he go up 2 more weight classes?
Now, what Terence Crawford, of course, is talking about is that a certain amount of people were criticizing his performance against Israel Madrimov, including myself. Because even though, of course, he was moving up in weight, and, that was the first time he had ever been in 154, and he was against a very relatively talented, European fighter in Israel Madrimov, and a guy that, of course, was one of the better fighters there at 154 and a champion. The thing is that Terence Crawford was probably supposed to perform a little bit better against that of an Israel Madrimov. And it wasn't just the fact that it was a very tough fight, but Terence Crawford did not look like he had the same level of speed. He also did not look like he had the same amount of power. He just didn't quite look like the same dominant Terence Crawford at 147. Now it could have been a little bit because of Madrimov's style, but to be honest with you, even Israel Madrimov, he stated after the fight, whether he's completely telling the truth, who knows, but, I don't think that he really has much reason to lie, but, excuse me, he stated that Terence Crawford's power pretty much felt regular, and he said it was to be expected because Terence Crawford, of course, was moving up a weight class, but he didn't really feel his power to be, say, catastrophic within that fight. So the question is that Terence Crawford now moving up 2 more weight classes. Canelo's not really a natural 168-pounder. He's really more of a 160-pounder, especially with his height and reach. But the thing is that Canelo Alvarez has been adjusted to the 160-plus pound weight divisions now for the past pretty much several years. So the question is Terence Crawford really going to be able to put a dent in Canelo Alvarez in terms of actually being able to keep him back? And is it going to be enough? Because if Canelo comes in there in prime condition, and then I'm not going to say peak form because I don't think that Canelo is in the prime of his career anymore. I don't think that he's really been in the prime of his career really for the past about, 3 to 4 years. But I mean, the question is, once again, is that what happens if Canelo Alvarez comes in great form and is actually able to come at you and be very consistent in terms of his attack? Are you going to be able to keep him back? Because you are going to have to gain Canelo Alvarez's respect. And I understand that Terence Crawford has great boxing ability. But the thing is that so does Canelo Alvarez. And on top of that, Canelo Alvarez has bone-crushing power. And he's been adjusted to these guys for a very, very long time that are bigger than Terence Bud Crawford and also bigger than himself.
Need that, because that's gonna make me more focused and turn into a different animal. So I need the people to say I can't do this, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not strong enough, or this person gonna knock me out, because that makes me get up and turn into Super Saiyan.
Right. as you move up in.
I've already stated this because I've had a certain amount of people debate me, I believe even on a live, to where they stated that they believed that Terence Bud Crawford was just selling out in this fight and that he was just going for the money. I think the money is a perk, but personally, I don't believe that Terence Bud Crawford is just doing this for the money. I think that when Jermell Charlo did it with Canelo Alvarez, that he was just going for the money. Because, Jermell Charlo, you can tell the way that someone talks in a press conference. You can tell overall the way that they truly think about their odds in a fight. You can tell if someone actually truly believes that they can win. Jermell Charlo, someone who's usually very boisterous and someone that he loves to talk a lot of trash about how he's going to knock you the hell out and all this other stuff. He basically became a little puppy dog in that Canelo Alvarez press conference. Canelo Alvarez, was his boss, and he said, yes, sir. That's how Jermell Charlo acted in that press conference. But I don't think that Terence Bud Crawford is doing that with Canelo Alvarez. I think that Terence Bud Crawford realizes that it's going to be a very uphill battle, even more uphill than any of the other fights in his career. But I think the reason why he's doing it is because if you've realized about Terence Bud Crawford's career, he's very sensitive, or he's a little bit insecure about his place within that of boxing history, especially that with his resume. Terence Bud Crawford has been, for a very long time, feeling like he's been disrespected by a certain amount of people, really his whole entire life. When you take a look at the way that he was raised by his mother, Terence Bud Crawford has always had a chip on his shoulder, and that's a part of the reason of his success. He's constantly motivated, and he has the great quality of turning the negative energy into positive energy for himself, which is very great. But I think the reason why he's fighting Canelo is because he realizes that if he's ever going to be in the same conversation as a Mayweather or a Pacquiao or a Sugar Ray Leonard or a Roy Jones Jr. or some of these other guys, he's going to have to beat someone like a Canelo Alvarez. Because no one is going to really care 20 years later on down the line and say, Crawford, he's up there with Floyd. And then when you take a look at his resume, he only has guys on there like Victor Postol and Gamboa and Israel Madrimov. No one's going to care. It just is what it is. Now, he still has some very big wins, but Terence Bud Crawford, once again, he's a very dominant and an all-time grade level fighter. There's no question about that. But his resume has been questionable. All right, it just is what it is. People can like that, they can not like that. But like I stated, Crawford only has about 5 A grade level names on his resume, and I don't give a shit who gets mad about that. At the end of the day, Victor Postol, I'll give him that one. I'll give him Yuriorkis Gamboa. I'll give him Sean Porter. I'll give him Errol Spence Jr. And I'll give him Madrimov. There's no other fighters on his list, on his resume, that are A grade. And I know that certain people are going to say, well, what about Jeff Horn? What about Amir Khan? What about Kell Brook? Amir Khan and Kell Brook were done by the time that Terence Crawford had fought them. It was very well known. By the time that Amir Khan had fought Crawford, he was knocked out cold on 3 separate occasions, or he was stopped on 3 separate occasions. 2 of those occasions being knocked out very cold. But the one that really did the most damage was Canelo Alvarez. After he got knocked out against Canelo, he was done. There was nothing left. And then he had a fight against Samuel Vargas to where, C-grade level fighter, where I think that he got knocked down once or twice in that fight. It was very clear that he was not the same fighter mentally nor physically. Then, of course, you take a look at Kell Brook, someone that had not been at the 147-pound weight class for years, for about 3 to 4 years. He fights, he then drains himself all the way down to 147 to fight Terence Bud Crawford. And then on top of that, it was very apparent in his other fights against bums that he wasn't even the same fighter anymore because his soul had been taken by Gennady Golovkin and Errol Spence. Now, are there fighters that have been stopped before and, they still have a little bit of greatness left within them? Sure. There are fighters like that. Like Mike Tyson after he ended up losing to Buster Douglas, there still was something left within him. Is there still something left in George Foreman after he got stopped by Ali? Sure. Was there something in, maybe some other fighters that I'm not thinking of? Sure. But oftentimes when a fighter ends up getting stopped the first 1 or 2 times in their career, especially in very brutal fashion, they're never the same again.
Weight. Some of the time they say, like, well, you move up in weight, you lose some of the power. But do you feel that you'll still be able to maintain that level of quickness moving up 2 weight classes? I mean, that's going to be 14 pounds, moving up 14 pounds. Are you still going to be able to possess? Because everybody says, well, Canelo has power. That's his natural fighting weight. You're moving up. That's not your natural fighting weight.
I've already discussed this. Not to interrupt Shannon Sharp too much, but this is really going to be the key contributing factor. So I'm glad that Shannon Sharp is asking these questions. The thing is this. I've already stated this. I don't care who you are on the planet. Even Canelo Alvarez, someone who has extraordinary level power. Now, of course, some people may say, well, is that power all quote unquote natural? Probably not, because we know that Canelo Alvarez, of course, has been caught on performance enhancing drugs. But the point is that Canelo Alvarez, whether you think he's clean or dirty right now, it's up to you. I think that he's still probably dirty, but to be fair with you, I think a lot of these fighters are dirty. So, that's just my perspective. But point is this, Canelo Alvarez, he has a great amount of power, but when he finally stepped a bit too far up against Dimitri Bivol in a weight class that he probably never should have been at, it was very clear that his level of power, was not affecting Dimitri Bivol to the same degree as what it had other fighters, because Bivol was used to that level of size and that level of power. So then eventually he said, well, I can take this, so I'm going to return fire. So we're going to see what ends up happening, but, I would be surprised if Terence Crawford just had this thudding power, the same that I seen in the Errol Spence fight. To be honest with you, it would be a little bit fishy that Terence Crawford, that all of a sudden he would have this level of power in the Canelo Alvarez fight, someone that's known to have debatably the greatest chin that I've seen out of any all-time grade level fighter, and someone that has never even been knocked down once in his career. Crawford is moving up 2 weight classes, and then all of a sudden he has the same level of power as what he did in the Errol Spence Jr. fight. That'd be interesting. And what I will state is this. I'm not going to allege anything with 100% certainty, but what I will state is this. Because I remember when Tyson Fury, when he allegedly had that glove gate thing going on, and nobody really wanted to talk about it, what I'll personally state is this. There have been 2 times where something has been caught with Terence Crawford's gloves that have been a little bit fishy. In the David Avanesian fight, not just one of his gloves, but both gloves ended up busting open in the fight. I've never seen that happen in any professional boxing fight, unless usually the gloves were doctored in some sort of way to remove the padding, or to move, to kind of, move around the padding a little bit, maybe, to make the punches a bit harder. Is that possible? Maybe. Now, am I stating that with 100% certainty? No, I'm not. But what I also will state is this. Right before the Israel Madrimov fight, apparently his gloves had to be replaced, or something was up with his gloves, and they had to change the gloves because apparently something was off with them. So once again, Terence Crawford, what I'll state is this. I think that he's a naturally great puncher, and I don't like to allege anything without 100% evidence. But many boxers in the past have also moved around padding, or kind of done that in order to increase their level of power. I've heard rumors of a different amount of boxers ended up doing that. But the thing is that could it be possible that Terence Crawford is doing that? It's possible. I'm not going to state 100% with a certainty because I don't have enough evidence, but I do think that it's a little bit odd. And for certain people that don't believe me, you can go ahead and look it up. Don't just take my word for it.
You have the speed advantage. So are you going to be able to maintain that speed advantage and still be able to pack a punch?
Of course. I think, if you can punch, you can punch.
Okay.
Right, if you can punch, Terence Crawford, but you know just as well as I do that moving up the weight classes, your power is normally going to decrease as you go up the weight classes. And certain people, the reason why many people thought that Manny Pacquiao was on steroids, throughout his career, is that he kept going up the weight classes, but it seemed like his speed and his level of power, kept staying the same. So that's why so many people are like, that's a little bit fishy. But what's so very interesting is that a lot of these channels, or a lot of these people that claim that Manny Pacquiao was on steroids, because he kept looking the same, coming from fight to fight, or moving up the weight classes, it's very interesting. We don't hear any of these allegations with some of these fighters that all of a sudden want to move up 2 or 3 weight classes, including Terence Crawford.
It may not have the same effect that it did on a smaller guy, on a bigger guy, but if you sharp, you sharp.
Right.
And I don't got to knock him out. I just got to beat him.
Right.
A lot of people think.
And I agree with you there, Mr. Terence Crawford. In my view, that really is the best way, because I just don't see you knocking out Canelo Alvarez. Not unless Canelo Alvarez, not unless he's just so aged to the point to where, he's nowhere near the same. And we'll talk about that as the video goes along. But anyway.
Just because a person punch harder than, another fighter, that they automatically gonna win. No, it's a lot of fighters that lost, and they punch way harder than the fighter that they lost to.
Right.
Canelo's not just...
Agreed. And one of the slider examples, I'm not going to say that this man punched way harder than Crawford, but, any fighter that was in the ring against Errol Spence and Crawford, whether it be Sean Porter or Kell Brook or whoever it was, they all stated that Errol Spence Jr. was the stronger / more powerful puncher. But it didn't matter because Terence Bud Crawford is a decent amount more skilled than Errol Spence. He has a couple more dimensions to his boxing ability than what Errol Spence ever did. Errol Spence is a decent all-around boxer, and he can fight somewhat good within a multitude of ways, but he can't fight great within a multitude of ways. And that's why, although I predicted Spence to win that fight, because I thought that he was going to be able to bully Crawford, once I seen that knockdown happen in round 2, I said, this fight's over. There's no way. Because as soon as Crawford proved that he had enough power to hit back Spence and hurt him early and keep the fight within the mid-range to long range, there was no way that Spence was ever going to win a mid-range to long-range match with that of a Terence Bud Crawford. It wasn't ever going to happen because he doesn't have the speed, he doesn't have the foot speed, he doesn't have the boxing ability nor the head movement to deal with the Terence Bud Crawford in any of those weight class, or excuse me, in any of those dimensions. He just doesn't.
The puncher, I don't know why. That's
what people believe, huh?
It's just like this. They don't know boxing. They just looking at him being strong.
The bigger man.
He's a great boxer. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Right.
Agreed, Terence Bud Crawford. Thank you for stating that. Because you have so many of these either Terence Bud Crawford fanboys or a lot of these LDBC and new media channels that are so pro-racial. And you get these guys saying like, oh, well, all Canelo really has over Crawford is power. Once again, people must understand this. You can be a guy that's 5'7" like Canelo Alvarez with a 71-inch arm reach and beat guys that are bigger than you and lengthier than you and way more than you overall throughout your career. People like Danny Jacobs and Caleb Plant and, Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, although, of course, a lot of people thought that fight was fixed. It's up to you. But, I mean, the point being is that, he fought a certain amount of guys that were actually bigger than him or comparable in size. Gennady Golovkin, Danny Jacobs, Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, Jaime Munguia. Like, he outboxed all those guys. He was able to beat every single one of those guys. And you just have these people that want to make you believe that Canelo Alvarez is just this one-dimensional boxer. There's never been a one-dimensional boxer in the history of the sport that has been severely smaller than their opponents, or at least smaller than their opponents. I won't say severely because Canelo is quite a big girthy. He weighs a little bit heavier, but, there's not someone that, is out-lengthened and sometimes outweighed and out-heightened by their opponents. And overall, they end up winning the majority of the big fights in their career, and they're just a one-dimensional boxer. It doesn't happen.
People taking away from his boxing skills and just thinking that he's just this
Agreed.
puncher when that's not true. So that's why I laugh, because we're not just looking at Canelo as a puncher. We're looking at him as a whole fighter. Mm-hmm.
Very smart of you, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford, because Canelo Alvarez, I don't give a shit who says what. Canelo Alvarez is hands down the most skilled boxer and most skilled fighter that Terence Bud Crawford has ever fought. It's not even relatively close. Now, certain people may say Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence is a very great boxer. He's not on the level of Canelo Alvarez. Pretty much other than that, maybe a certain footwork or, honestly, that's really about it. Stamina, maybe. I mean, there's not really anything else that Errol Spence Jr. beats Canelo Alvarez in. He doesn't really beat him in, head movement, nowhere near close. I don't think that he's a better defensive fighter than Canelo Alvarez. Canelo has way better upper body movement. There's really nothing that Errol Spence really truly beats Canelo Alvarez in. Canelo is a much better counterpuncher. He's a guy that, in my view, can fight better within the mid-range. Now, what I will state is this. Canelo Alvarez, in my personal view, to make sure if he wants to win the fight, he's going to have to try to bully Terence Bud Crawford. I don't think that it would always be the best idea to try to box Terence Bud Crawford in the middle of the ring, because what I will state is this. Canelo Alvarez doesn't really have many faults, but the one or two faults that he does have, the main one is being that he can have very slow feet at times. So Canelo Alvarez, he is not going to be able to compete with Terence Bud Crawford in terms of the foot speed or footwork if Terence Bud Crawford does, have some of his foot speed. So Canelo Alvarez needs to know what type of fight to fight within this fight. He needs, to make sure that, he is trying to press the fight forward, because that's the fight that is going to win him the fight. As for Crawford, you want to keep this fight within the mid-range and on the back foot and make sure that you do not stay up on the ropes too consistently. But what I will state is this: when fighters move up in the weight, especially if Crawford is trying to fight at 185, although Crawford, of course, is known for stamina, that is going to affect his speed. That is going to affect his stamina. Any fighter that usually tries to gain that amount of weight, especially when they're not used to it. Now, of course, Terence says, well, I'm used to walking around in that weight. Right, but it's different walking around in that weight and fighting at that weight. Because when you walk around, although you might be doing exercise possibly at that weight, that's great. But, it's different getting in the ring against a guy that is highly defensively responsible like a Canelo Alvarez, and someone that's going to be hitting you and you're going to be hurt. There is pretty much nothing that can replicate that level of stamina in a boxing fight, to where you always have to move, you always have to set up traps, and then on top of that, you're getting hit in return. So we'll see.
Complete fighter. He can take a punch, he can deliver a punch, he can counter punch you, he can box you, he can punch on you, you know what I mean?
Thank you, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford, for stating that, because if you listen to some of these dumbass channels, they'll make you think like Canelo Alvarez is like a bigger version of Isaac Pitbull Cruz or some shit. Thank you.
Good body puncher, good, fighter that got good balance. He never getting out of position. So we looking at all that.
Where were you when you decided to say, you know what, my next great adventure, Canelo?
It's crazy. I don't even know. I don't even know where I was at, but it was.
Just to be honest, in my personal view, I think that Terence Bud Crawford, I think that he's been thinking about it for a little while. Usually when a fighter or when someone ends up having this idea, they don't just usually think of it out of nowhere, especially on the level of a Canelo Alvarez. They usually have been thinking about it for years, and then eventually if it gets realistic enough to where they're going to do that, then they do it.
Like, I'm always willing to challenge myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like today with you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No, it's just in
That's
me.
the first thing he did. He came in, I tackled you.
It's just in me.
By the way, for those of you that don't know, Terence Bud Crawford is also a great wrestler.
It's just the competitive nature in me. If I was sitting next to Michael Jordan, I'd be like, man, let's play one-on-one.
Right.
Let me see how many I can score on you. That's just me. So accomplishing so much and failing to have the Manny Pacquiao fights, the Cotto fights, and the Shane Mosley that all the other great fighters had.
Those all would have been very interesting fights, just to kind of talk about them, because of course Pacquiao, Cotto, and Mosley, they were three of the greater fighters of the 2000s, of course, kind of heading into the 2010s. But Pacquiao's career, of course, lasted the longest. Of course, it ended in, I think, like 2020 or 21, whatever year it was. I don't remember. The year that he lost to Ugas. He didn't really have any legs left. Cotto, of course, he pretty much was done by the time he was 35. When he ended up losing, I believe, to Saddam Ali in that last fight where he tore his bicep. And Shane Mosley, I mean, he was still around, but he was kind of done by the time that he had fought Canelo Alvarez. Those would have all been very interesting fights, I would have loved to have seen Terence Bud Crawford versus Miguel Cotto. For those of you, of course, that don't know or don't see the image, of my channel, Miguel Cotto, of course, is the main fighter that's on there. Miguel Cotto was one of my all-time favorite fighters, especially younger watching him. Cotto, in my view, is actually one of the more underrated boxers of all time. He was a highly, highly skilled level boxer. It's just that, he wasn't ever the guy that was going to become number one pound for pound. He didn't beat Mayweather, he didn't beat Pacquiao, he didn't beat Canelo. But he was basically like the number one pound for pound gatekeeper. There are certain fighters that are all-time great level gatekeepers, and that's what Miguel Cotto was. There are certain fighters that, when you end up facing them, if you're not debatably going to eventually become the number one pound for pound fighter or have that potential, you're not beating them. There are certain fighters that are like that. Tommy Hearns was one of those guys. Tommy Hearns was a guy that, he wouldn't really win a lot of the bigger fights in his career, against Sugar Ray Leonard or Marvin Hagler or some of those guys, but he could beat other guys like Wilfredo Benitez and, other certain guys. Anyway.
When these fighters was on their way out.
But I would have loved to have seen Terence Crawford against Miguel Cotto, because Cotto, in my view, would have been the most skilled fighter that he would have ever fought in his career. More skilled than Errol Spence.
That made them, the star that they is, not having those guys to share the ring with.
Right.
It's like, oh man, what can you do to leapfrog those fighters?
Mm-hmm.
Why not go up 3
Exactly. What did I say? Terence Bud Crawford was taking this fight for. He's basically admitting it right there.
weight classes? I wanted to go up 3, just to be honest. I didn't want to fight at 154. I wanted to go.
So you want to go straight from 47 to 68?
Yes, I did. It's documented. I wanted to go from 147 to 168. Just be.
Like I said, more than likely, when fighters end up planning a fight, especially with the magnitude of Canelo Alvarez, Crawford's probably been thinking about this at the very least a couple of years. I have no doubt about that in my mind. And this pretty much confirms it.
Because I want to challenge myself.
But that's a...
Yeah, and that's the joy of it. That's the joy of it. Everybody's like, man, boy, you crazy. Yeah, you got to be crazy to think of things.
Yeah,
like
because
that.
not a whole lot.
Well, this is just my personal view of it. I really don't mind Terence Bud Crawford fighting Canelo Alvarez at this point. And the reason why I don't mind Terence Bud Crawford fighting Canelo Alvarez is because who else is he really going to fight that's really going to update his legacy? Sure, he could beat someone like a Duran Boots Ennis or fight someone like that, but he's very young. He's also someone that could potentially beat Crawford, and Crawford's pretty much proved everything that he needed to at the welterweight division. So, I mean, Canelo is a guy that, it's not like he's the biggest super middleweight in the world. He's really more of a middleweight. And he's a guy that really, he's not even as tall and as lengthy as Crawford. So, I mean, it's not a fight that's completely unwinnable for Crawford. I would not predict for him to win. But if Crawford ended up beating Canelo Alvarez, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time we've seen, an upset like that. Roberto Duran, of course, was able to do it over Sugar Ray Leonard. Then Sugar Ray Leonard, of course, was able to do it over Hagler. Mosley over Oscar De La Hoya. Now I think that Canelo Alvarez is probably greater than a couple of those fighters, including De La Hoya, But I mean, point being is that when you talk about it, it's kind of an intriguing fight.
A lot of guys, I mean, Roy went from 168 to one, and he weighed the heavyweight, and I think he weighed 190.
Well, Roy actually went from 175 to heavyweight. He didn't go from 168 to heavyweight. He went from 175 to heavyweight. He skipped the cruiserweight division, Shannon.
3 in that fight. So that was basically, I mean, that's 25 pounds that he went up. You'd be going up 20. You'd be going up 20.
And let me also say this about Roy Jones very quickly, because there's so many arguments today. Like I remember when Canelo Alvarez was talking up to move up to cruiserweight and fight Lunga Makabu, you had all these idiots that clearly just wanted him to lose. They said, well, why are you fighting Lunga Makabu? Fight Alexander Usyk. Like, dude, you want Canelo Alvarez that's 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach to go up immediately to cruiserweight and fight a guy that at the time would have been top 5 pound per pound, a guy that was 6'3" with a 78-inch arm reach and would have weighed like 220 pounds? Like, are you serious? Like, come on, man. Like, no one took a look at Roy Jones Jr. and said, hey, Roy Jones, your first fight at heavyweight, go fight Lennox Lewis. Like, come on, man. Like, are you serious? It's fucking ridiculous. Now, what certain people overall, maybe can say is that, Canelo, of course, was being asked to fight certain guys like David Benavidez and Charlo, although Charlo kind of blew it because Charlo turned down a contract years ago. But, I mean, it is what it is. And, maybe some other fighters, I get it. But it just goes to show you that, a certain amount of those channels or a certain amount of people, they clearly just wanted Canelo Alvarez to lose. That's the tactic overall people always want to take whenever a fighter wants to lose. Floyd Mayweather had, basically that same treatment. They said, well, Floyd, if you're going to move up to 160, fight immediately Gennady Golovkin or Sergio Martinez, because Floyd was such an exceptional level boxer. Unless you had some sort of advantage over him, you probably weren't going to beat him.
1 pound. And normally guys like go up incrementally. You fought it. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think Sugar Ray and Duran fought at lightweight at 135. I think
No.
No, they didn't fight at lightweight at 135, Shannon. Roberto Duran was looked at as the best 135 pounder in the world. He went up to 147. He actually skipped one weight class. He went up 2 weight classes. He beat Sugar Ray Leonard in the first fight. And then he became probably the number 1 pound per pound fighter on the planet.
147?
Yeah.
Yes, Terence Bud Crawford is aware.
I know Hagler. I know Sugar Ray and Hagler. Hearns fought at 47, but Sugar Ray and Hagler fought at 160. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, 147. He go to 154. He go to 160. We cool. Okay, Bud. Okay, I like that. Yeah. Bud, think about going to super middle?
Yeah. That's the excitement about it. When I look at it, like, I always had this this mind frame of the bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Okay.
I've been beating up big dudes all my life.
This is another myth overall that Terence Bud Crawford and a certain amount of people also have been promoting. That Terence Bud Crawford has been beating up big dudes his whole entire life. Terence, what big dudes in your professional career, quote unquote, that would have been A-grade level fighters have you really, quote unquote, beat? I've already talked about this a multitude of times, and Terence is a phenomenal fighter. But there's always these myths that go around boxing, overall, that are really more myth than actual reality. Who has Terence Bud Crawford really beat that have been, quote unquote, big dudes? Like Victor Postal, I guess, kind of outlengthened him a little bit, but he also had the movement of a sharp, a number 2 pencil. So, I mean, give me a fucking break. Victor Postal was a guy that was very big at 140, but he never won any of the big fights there. I'll give him credit for Postal. Gamboa, of course, was way smaller than him. When you talk about that of a narrow Spence, he was a bit stockier and girthier. I guess I'll give you that. But combined with the reach and the amount of time he had to adjust there, it pretty much was even. I mean, Madrimov was a bit girthier, but Crawford had about a 5-inch reach advantage over him. So, I mean, what big dudes have you really been fighting, Crawford? I'm sorry, I'm just not seeing it, man. Like, when you talk about Canelo Alvarez, at least with Canelo, we can take a look and see that Gennady was clearly at least a little bit bigger. That Danny Jacobs was clearly bigger than Canelo. That Jaime Munguia was clearly bigger than Canelo. That Sergey Krashikovlev was clearly bigger than Canelo. Caleb Plant was clearly bigger than Canelo. Callum Smith was clearly bigger than Canelo. I'm sorry, but this narrative about Crawford beating up big dudes his whole entire career, like, these people have no idea what the hell they're talking about. And I know that there's going to be certain guys that say that, oh, well, Terence Bud Crawford, he started off his career at 135. How could you say that? Right, but just because you start your career off at a certain weight class doesn't necessarily mean that you belong at that weight class forever. And I've stated this for a very long time. Like, when you take a look at Oscar De La Hoya, the man, I believe, started off at 130 or 135. He was a weight bully at those weight classes. That's why whenever I say that Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford, by the way, they're both greater than Oscar De La Hoya, I get certain people overall that come on my channel say, you don't know what you're talking about. Oscar would have whooped Canelo Alvarez on his worst day. All this bullshit. Oscar De La Hoya couldn't even beat Sugar Shane Mosley. And there's no offense against Shane Mosley. Shane Mosley was a relatively great boxer. He also at times was very one-dimensional and didn't really have a certain plan of attacks. He was a very good boxer, but he was a little bit overrated in terms of his skill set. That's why he would get outboxed by guys like Floyd Mayweather and Vernon Forrest and Miguel Cotto. All those guys, or at least Cotto and Mayweather, they were better than Mosley. It is what it is. And Oscar probably should have won the rematch against Mosley, but I mean, it's whatever. They ended up giving it to Mosley, which is a bit unfortunate because I thought that Oscar clearly should have won that fight. But I mean, I think it was competitive. But the first fight, Mosley definitely won against Oscar. But Oscar, people always say, to me that, oh, well, Oscar beat Chavez and Whitaker. Right, you were supposed to beat those guys. Those guys were like 5'6" to 5'7", pretty much natural 135 to 140 pounders. You were a guy that really belonged more at 147 to 154, at your absolute physical prime. You were really more of a weight bully there. And you were a guy that was like, what, almost 6 foot with like a 76-inch arm reach? Like, I'm sorry, dude, get the fuck out of here. Or like 74 inches, something like that. Either way, decently bigger than both Chavez and Whitaker.
They estimate you how good.
It's just, even if they didn't, I'm going to beat you up. I can fight.
Right.
So if you watch, like, all these dudes bigger than me.
Yeah.
Like.
Terrence, no, they're not. Stop bullshitting. Which dudes are bigger than you? Which fighters that actually mattered were bigger than you? Just stop.
I don't care, but I'm going to find a way to win, no matter.
Once again, take a look at Canelo Alvarez's fight against Danny Jacobs. Name me one fight, A-grade level fight, that Terence Bud Crawford has been in his career to where the size comparison was that different. You're not going to find one.
What?
Okay. You win this fight, then what? Where you go from there, bud? You can't go back down.
I might go to heavyweight. Nah, I just play.
Man, if he beats Canelo Alvarez, man's gonna challenge Alexander Usyk.
Once you, let's just say for the sake of argument, and I'm gonna say, Bud, you win this fight at 168. You can't fight someone else. You can't fight anybody at 147 because everybody will say, why is he fighting? Yeah,
I can't make 147 either. Anyway,
you can't make 147 again.
No, it's over.
What about 54? Junior middle.
Man, we're gonna go to 168.
So you gonna go to 168?
To be honest with you, I don't see Terence Bud Crawford's career stretching much farther after this Canelo Alvarez fight, assuming, of course, that the fight ends up happening. And I'm not stating that overall because, with 100% certainty that I think Canelo would win. Whether he ends up winning or losing, there's no way he's going to be able to stay at 168 unless there's a rematch between himself and Canelo Alvarez. And then number two, even if whether you win or lose, if you go back down to 154, not only are you going to have a certain amount of damage, but certain fighters, when they end up going up a weight class and then all of a sudden they end up going back down, sometimes it doesn't end up going well. We've seen that with Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr. went from the heavyweight division, all of a sudden had to lose some of that muscle mass and some of that other mass, went to 175 again, and he was never the same. That really was what precipitated Roy Jones Jr.'s downfall.
Hey there,
I ain't thinking about nothing but 168.
number there.
168.
Is it over after that?
I don't know. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that.
What be left?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying.
You would have scaled the 7 summits
Yeah.
and finished off with Mount Everest.
We might do a rematch. You never know.
See that? See that? See overall what Terence Crawford's plan is?
How long have you had this Canelo fight in your head?
Man. I've been thinking about Canelo for like a year now.
Boom. Told you.
Providing fewer commutes, more backyard offices.
And all that is horse shit. He's been thinking about Canelo Alvarez, overall for more than that. But anyway.
A year now. Probably a little bit after after Spence. A little bit after Spence. When they start talking about Spence and Canelo, I started thinking like, man, Canelo too big for Spence. Like, he gonna clean Spence.
Well, they were talking about Canelo Alvarez versus Spence several years ago. Because the plan was that Errol Spence was going to take over the welterweight division, and that eventually, more than likely, they were going to make a super fight between the Latino-Mexican fighter and Errol Spence Jr., who's a natural, I believe, Texas native, and they were both going to have that big fight more than likely in Dallas.
But then I started looking at it. I'm like, Canelo not that big.
Yeah.
He's a...
Thank you, Terence. I've been... Once again, Terence Crawford dropping some dimes here, man. I keep telling people that Canelo Alvarez, he can box, and he's a guy, once again, he's not that big. People act like Canelo Alvarez is just way bigger than Crawford. He's not. Now, don't get it twisted. Is he bigger? Yes. Is he going to be about 20 pounds bigger than Crawford? I mean, he should be, unless Crawford, in my view, gains too much weight. But the thing is that, once again, Canelo was not a guy that is a super big fighter. He's just not, especially for a super middleweight.
Smaller fighter that's fighting in a bigger division.
Thank you, sir. Oh, man, what have I been saying? What have I been saying, ladies and gentlemen, for the longest time? Oh, thank goodness, Terence Crawford. Thank you for spitting some truth out there.
So I started just sizing myself up to Canelo.
Right.
In my head, he's 5'7". I'm 5'8". I got a 74-inch reach. He got like a 60-something.
No, he's got a 71-inch reach, but either way, you will have the reach advantage over Canelo.
He's wider than me, but that's it. So I'm like, it match up. It matches up. Like, I can do that fight.
Did you ever think he would...
And that's exactly what Terence Crawford was saying. And I've already told people this. If this fight were between Terence Crawford and Caleb Plant, Terence Crawford would say, no fucking way, you're out of your mind. I keep telling people this. Because you get some of these channels or you get some of these guys saying that, the reason why Crawford, so many people are saying he can win this fight is because that's how limited Canelo Alvarez is. No, the reason why people are saying that is because they realize that their size is a lot more comparable than what some people are letting on. Canelo is not a big super middleweight guy. He's really even, in terms of certain middleweight things, he's even a little bit small for that division in certain statures, because he was not as big as Danny Jacobs nor as Gennady Golovkin.
He would accept it? Or you just going to put enough pressure on him, you're going to keep putting it out there and have people put it out there and say, hey, the only fight that makes sense for Bud is Canelo. The only fight that makes sense for Canelo, if he want to fight somebody and he want a super, super payday, Bud Crawford is it.
For sure. There's no fighter out right now that's bigger than Crawford Canelo. No fight.
I agree.
Well, what I'll personally state is this. I do believe that the Canelo versus David Benavidez fight would more than likely be bigger. But, the the Canelo versus Crawford fight or Crawford versus Canelo fight, that fight still is very big.
I agree. So a lot of people, I know a lot of people say, oh, well, Benavidez, everybody want him to fight Benavidez. And that's a great fight. And that's a damn good fight. But given the circumstances of Black versus Mexican and the history have always did bigger numbers than anything.
And that's usually very true. But we also must realize that Terence Crawford, that he's never really had the biggest amount of star power. And that's not me to insult Terence Crawford whatsoever, but he's not a Canelo Alvarez. He's not someone that was an Errol Spence during his heyday or a Gervonta Tank Davis. Terence Crawford was pretty much known for being a greatly skilled boxer, and there are just certain people that are like that. Certain guys are all-time grade level fighters, but they're just never great gate level attractions. Terence Crawford is a guy to where, a lot of people love to watch him, but, they're not really willing to pay money for his pay-per-views. So, just is what it is. And, for those of you that don't believe me, you could take a look at the numbers. Even against Errol Spence Jr., that fight that was supposed to be the quote-unquote fight of the decade, it only did about 750,000 pay-per-view buys.
Besides Manny Pacquiao, Floyd, and Floyd.
Now, of course, certain people would say, well, what do you mean only 750,000? That's a lot. Well, I mean, in terms of, but when you compare it to the standards of the quote-unquote fight of the decade, Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis did 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant did about 900,000 pay-per-view buys. When you talk about Canelo versus Munguia even, and Munguia, in my view, is about an A- level fighter when he fought him, but, still not, quote-unquote super fight, but that fight did about 550,000 buys. So the point is that, overall Crawford is he's been a fighter that always is a fighter that, people know about and is tremendous, but he's never really been a star.
Conor McGregor. But, yeah.
You believe these numbers will be comparable to that? There are projections that this fight is going to do somewhere between 600 and 750, or $750 million. Floyd right now has the record. He and Pacquiao did 600 million.
This fight is not going to break the Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. record. There's no way. A part of the reason why the Floyd versus Pacquiao fight got so many buys is because that fight, overall was built up for so long. That fight was built up, for several years. And it finally overall had ended up happening, but I don't think a lot of people are really going to fall for that type, of build up again, especially because many people were not really happy with the Floyd Mayweather Manny Pacquiao fight, even though it was a pretty good, technical fight. But anyway.
Revenue. You believe this fight, Canelo, Netflix can approach that number or go north of that number?
I don't know, because
I think that, to be quite honest with you, the most that I could see Canelo versus Crawford doing is 1.5 million pay-per-view buys. If it were to surpass that, I would be pretty surprised, or I would be a little bit surprised. Now, what I expect this fight more than likely to do is probably around 800,000 to 1 million pay-per-view buys. That's probably what I would guess.
It's different times that we live in. When you look at today's time, you got so much piracy. It's different. Back in the days, you didn't have that much.
No, yeah.
That definitely is a part of the factor, Terrence, but it's also that, let's be real, you're not anywhere near as big of a star as a Floyd or a Pacquiao. Just is what it is.
But now, everybody got an ad.
It's true.
My kids be talking about, oh, yeah, I'm watching the UFC fights. I'm like, I ain't pay for no UFC. I ain't watching it on their phone.
Right.
So it's way different nowadays, right. And it's hard. It remind me of back in the days when they was burning CDs.
Yeah.
And the artists was like, man, we can't make
no money.
We can't make no money because everybody burning CDs and stuff like that. So I just think, it's going to do tremendous numbers. But to say I know how much, I don't.
Because I'm looking at, say, Canelo's guaranteed 150, you guaranteed 100 million. Damn, bud. It's too late for me to train?
Well, Shannon Sharp, you could always try to get in the ring with Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez overall, he might give you a go.
I mean, that's
And of course, Shannon Sharp, of course, he wasn't a fighter, but Shannon Sharp, of course, was in somewhat of a brutal sport himself. Of course, that being NFL football. Shannon Sharp, of course, for those of you that don't know, he was one of the all-time great level tight ends. I believe that he was a 3-time Super Bowl champion, 2-time with the Denver Broncos. He really was one of the key contributors as to him and Terrell Davis and John Elway into what really made them 2-time Super Bowl champions. John Elway, of course, I believe was able to finally win Super Bowls after like 3 Super Bowl appearances in the 80s, I think, in the 90s. He ended up winning, the last 2. I think it was in 1998 and 1999. And Shannon Sharp, of course, won 2 of those Super Bowls. But Shannon Sharp, of course, is one of the greatest NFL players ever. He's also one of the greatest tight ends of all time. Now, is he the greatest NFL tight end of all time? Not quite sure about that, but I mean, it's debatable. When you talk about the greatest NFL tight ends of all time, usually in that conversation, you got Shannon Sharp, Rob Gronkowski, who, of course, is a 4-time Super Bowl champion. You also have Tony Gonzalez, who, of course, isn't a Super Bowl champion, but he just wasn't really on teams that had that much success. And then, of course, also Travis Kelce has recently been into the mix as well. One of the biggest wigger white boys I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, great tight end, though.
That number, that sounds like a number that you can get down with?
Man, I don't know, man. I don't know,
bud. I mean, I'm trying to help me out on this, because Marvin Hagler once said, it's hard. It gets hard once you got mink slippers and silk pajamas to get up there and train and get hit in the face again.
That's what he said.
Speaking of Marvin Hagler, one of the all-time great level middleweights and also one of the all-time great level fighters. There's a certain amount of people that are predicting Terence Crawford to win this fight. Well, what I'll personally state is this. If Crawford ends up winning this fight, or if you're one of these guys that, I shouldn't say that, but if you're one of these guys or one of these people that are predicting Terence Crawford to beat Canelo Alvarez, or saying that he's a way better fighter than Canelo Alvarez and that, Canelo can't even compare to the skill set of a Terence Crawford, well, no problem. But then just don't sit here and tell me that if Canelo Alvarez beats Terence Crawford, especially in dominant fashion, let's not make up all these excuses and then say, oh, well, he only lost because of the size. Because you were heading into this fight claiming that Crawford was going to beat Canelo, and that Crawford is 10 times the fighter of a Canelo Alvarez. You can't be 10 times the fighter of somebody when Canelo's really a middleweight at most. A guy that has a 5'7" frame and, a 71-inch arm reach. Crawford is lengthier in both height and reach, and then he's 10 times the fighter that Canelo Alvarez is. And then Canelo Alvarez ends up dominating him, if that ends up happening. So once again, no problem if you predict Crawford to win this fight and if you're going off of that. But if Canelo Alvarez ends up beating Terence Crawford in dominant fashion, what that has to mean is that Canelo then has to be transferred over certain fighters like a Marvin Hagler.
Yes, but here's the thing.
I know Silks.
No, but look at Floyd. Everything Floyd was making money doing 30, doing 40 million, $50 million a fight, and he still had the same desire as if he had $2. Bud Crawford made money, and he still has the desire to get up and train as if he has $5. How does one stay in that mind? Because it's easy now. Bud, you live in the ivory tower. You just told me you got a new crib built. Although it costs you $63, it's a new crib. Well, I'm saying, you got this new palatial estate, and you still stay hungry. How?
Because, I don't want to lose. That's the thing. I don't want to lose in nothing. So.
And I believe Terence Crawford when he says that. Listen, for those of you that have seen maniacal competitors, throughout your day, when you're talking about maniacal competitors, you're talking about Michael Jordan, who might be the most maniacal competitor that has ever lived, at least within this era that we're talking about. Of course, you're talking about guys like Kobe Bryant to a degree, Larry Bird, not to just bring up basketball players, but, Novak Djokovic, of course, within tennis, and also, I'm trying to think of who else. Tom Brady, of course, he's a maniacal competitor. Crawford is up there with those guys. He may not be as great for his sport as those guys, because when you talk about some of those guys, at least guys like Jordan and Djokovic and Brady, you're talking about the greatest ever in that particular sport, in my personal view. But Terence Crawford is great enough in his own right. He's one of the all-time level great fighters, in my view, and he is a maniacal competitor that always has a chip on his shoulder. So I believe him when he says that.
I'm fighting for my future.
And of course, let me not forget Floyd Mayweather Jr.
My kids' future. So if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it to win. I'm not gonna half do it. I'm not gonna half step it. I'm not gonna play around with it. I'm gonna try to win. So that's my motivation, my family, to secure them with generational wealth, with the businesses that I've created,
Right.
the things that I put my money into, to teach them that anything is possible. And then not only that, for their kids' kids
Right.
can live off of their great grandpa's success. Like, when you see a trust fund baby.
The Ford family, the Rockefeller, the Kellogg, the M&M Mars, the Heinz ketchup.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Why can't, where I come from, man, people don't be leaving their kids nothing.
That reminds me, overall, if you remembered, for any of you that have read the book, or at least a part of the book, of Mike Tyson, The Undisputed Truth, Mike Tyson, I believe, said something along the lines to where his goal was to make sure that his name, Tyson, was the most known Tyson name on the planet Earth, even to surpass Tyson Foods, which I believe, of course, is a chicken company, And, of course, he was someone able to do it. But just to talk about Mike Tyson real quick, Tyson was a great level fighter. In my view, he's one of the more overrated ones. He was an all-time great level, fighter to a degree, or at least an all-time great level talent. But he just lost so many of the bigger fights in his career. That's why, it amazes me when people actually say that Mike Tyson, that, he's a top 20 fighter of all time, or that, he's the greatest heavyweight ever. Sorry, but you have to win your bigger fights in your career. It just is what it is.
Right.
When they pass, man, people
You leave them in debt because they ain't got nothing to leave. What? I can't leave.
sell dinners and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I just always told myself, if something ever was to happen to me, my kids gonna be straight with or without me.
But I don't know, bud. 150 mil. You still gonna want to go in there and train? You still gonna want to go do another fight?
They might come with 250. They might come with 200.
I'm going to get it. So, training. Obviously, you're gonna have to train. You're training for a bigger fighter. So, what's that? Have you thought about? Have you lined up some sparring partners? Because you probably have to fight. Spar with bigger guys than what you normally spar with.
No?
But you try to make this.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I'm not believing that one. More than likely, Terence Crawford, and I think that it's already been revealed that he is training with certain guys that are quote-unquote light heavyweights and guys like that. Now, of course, are those fighters going all out? No. But, the thing is that it will at least help him adjust to Canelo Alvarez's size and power. Now, the interesting thing is that, once again, Canelo's not your regular super middleweight or middleweight. He's a guy that's a little bit smaller than some of those guys, especially in terms of height and reach.
Thing seem like routine. It ain't routine, bud.
Man, listen. I don't spar people my size. Everybody I spar is bigger than me.
Ocho said he want to spar.
I know, he told me. He came down, he said, man, you want to get in the ring with me? I said, man, listen, Ocho.
That's what I keep telling him.
I said, man.
But he doing an MMA fight with Debo, James Harrison.
I don't want to do it to him. Ocho good, man. That's my guy.
Yeah.
Talking about James Harrison, and I believe that he's also talking about Chad Ochocinco. Chad Ochocinco, who, of course, went in the boxing ring not too long ago, I believe, and actually won the fight, I believe, so good on him. But, of course, he has nowhere near the boxing talent of a Crawford. As for James Harrison, that dude is just one big, gigantic roid. For those of you that don't remember James Harrison, I believe, was mainly with the Pittsburgh Steelers, later on the New England Patriots. I think he was either a defensive end or, some sort of, defensive frontman. But anyway, great player.
Funny than a mug.
He is funny. But go ahead, do one round, touch him up a couple times.
Y'all be wanting him to get straight.
I would have, because he be every fighter. We had another.
Hey, he do it.
Yeah,
He wanna
everything. So
Andre Ward.
Yeah.
Andre Ward.
Hey, just like pop up. Just like ooh. Yeah.
I don't think he want. I think he just want the joy and the bragging rights to say he been in there with us.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't think he want to get in there and for us to really spar him.
No. Just 1 minute. Just put 1 minute on. Just 1 minute on the clock.
Okay.
Shannon's like, just beat his ass. Shannon's like, just beat his ass just for 60 seconds.
Okay. That's it. No.
Okay.
That's it. No, 30 seconds. Let's get it down to 30. 30.
I'm gonna tell her, be like, man, hey, Shannon,
Do 30. Hey, just touch him a couple
Tell him
times.
line you up.
No, don't go all out on it. But just
trying to line him up, man.
yeah, hey, Ocho, bug go ta-ta. And I'm gonna be right there with my camera.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. How different, you win this fight, how different is the perception of Bud Crawford gonna be? Does this put you?
It's going to be completely different, or at least it's going to be a lot different. I mean, well, I shouldn't say a lot different. He's still going to be looked at as an all-time grade level fighter. But if he beats Canelo Alvarez, he is going to be talked about as debatably the greatest boxer of all time. He is. He'll be up there with Floyd. He'll be up there with guys like Pacquiao, Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roy Jones Jr., certain guys like that. You know, Roberto Duran, you know. Anyways, the point being is that whoever you consider the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, he's going to be up there with those fighters.
In that pantheon.
I honestly think I've been there.
Okay.
But, you know.
You're definitely up there with the upper pantheon of greats, Terence, but Crawford is just, I will not consider you as one of my top 10 greatest boxers of all time. And it's not that you don't have the talent nor the boxing ability to be there. It's just that I do have to rank it a little bit off of resume. But could Crawford be within the top 20 to top 30 of all time? Absolutely. Same with Canelo Alvarez.
Everybody else got their own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But after this, I think people will start respecting me more. But at the same time, they have some type of excuse.
Right.
You know, it's all.
Well, Terence, you know, I understand that a certain amount of people may be quote-unquote disrespecting you, but let's also be real. People know that your resume is not a quote-unquote all-time grade level resume. Let's just keep it a buck.
There's going to be some type of.
Like I said, no one cares that you defeated guys like Aegis Kavelasquez and Jose Benavidez, you know, and, you know, Raimundo Beltran and Thomas Delorme. No one cares. The wins that they're going to remember is Sean Porter, Errol Spence, maybe a Gamboa, maybe a Postol, and maybe a Madrimov. To be honest with you, that's really about it.
Excuse on why Terence Crawford was successful and why he won the fights that nobody thought he was going to win, or he did exactly what he said he was
Right.
going to do. But it was a reason why it happened at the time, or something wasn't right. So I just take it in stride.
There hadn't been very many 5-division champs. You beat Canelo at the weight and beat him at that weight. I mean, people are going to have to say Bud Crawford and with Floyd Mayweather, with Sugar Ray Robinson.
Absolutely, and that's the reason pretty much for this fight. The money is a perk, but Terence Bud Crawford realizes that if he does somehow win this fight, that there's going to be no questions about his career ever again. Although what I will personally state is this, and a certain amount of people, they may see this as a quote-unquote excuse, but I mean, to me, you know, if you've been paying attention to both of these guys' careers, it just is what it is. You've noticed it. Both these guys are really not at the prime point in their career anymore. They're definitely older as fighters. Terence Bud Crawford is the guy that, of course, is 38, I believe, turning 38, I believe, this year in 2025. And Canelo, of course, is turning 35, already turned 35. But what I will state is this. I would predict Canelo Alvarez to win this fight. But if he ended up losing, it wouldn't be, you know, a shell shock necessarily. I would be a little bit surprised. But it also depends on what form I see Canelo Alvarez in. If it's the Canelo that I've seen from the Jermell Charlo fight and also from the Munguia fight, I would definitely predict him to win the fight. But recently in training, and I mean, also it's been very apparent that the past few years that he's just really gotten older as a fighter. And I think that he's probably at a more compromised point in his career than what a Terence Bud Crawford is. Now, you can definitely tell that Terence Bud Crawford, that he's older and that he's at more of a compromised point in his career as well. He's definitely slower. Excuse me. He's definitely slower, you know, and definitely not quite the same speedy fighter as what he once was, although he's still got it. But, you know, the reason why I bring this up is because certain people always say, well, you know, why would you say that Canelo Alvarez, you know, is quote unquote older, you know, in terms of boxing years, or overall saying that he's more compromised because Terence Bud Crawford is older, you know, that's so biased of you to say. Well, the reason why I'm stating that, and people must realize this, not every career ends up being the same in terms of age. People must realize that. Like when you take a look at the NFL, Tom Brady ended up lasting until he was like, what, 43, 44 years old? Aaron Rodgers, of course, recently pretty much either had to retire or call it a career. Cam Newton only lasted about 9 to 10 NFL seasons as a true good quarterback. When you talk about boxing, it's very similar. Not every career is the same. Roy Jones Jr. was probably the greatest all-around fighter in the 90s, or at least the number one pound-for-pound fighter of the 90s. And at 35, he pretty much was done, because once he got knocked out by Antonio Tarver, that was it. He was never the same fighter ever again. But Bernard Hopkins was able to be still one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters, even for a short time, debatably number one pound-for-pound in his late 30s and early 40s. When you take a look, overall at that of Alexander Usyk right now, he's 38 years old. But he's debatably probably right now the number one pound-for-pound fighter. On my list, he would be number one pound-for-pound. Of course, if Crawford were able to beat Canelo, he would be, once again, my number one pound-for-pound fighter, probably undisputedly. But Canelo Alvarez, the reason why I state this is because people don't understand this. Canelo Alvarez, when you're a guy that has been fighting bigger guys like Danny Jacobs, Gennady Golovkin, and Caleb Plant and Sergey the Crusher Kovalev and, Callum Smith and some of these other guys. And on top of that, he probably has the best resume of the past 10 years out of any other fighter, within his generation. Of course, now talking about Mayweather or Pacquiao, because they were pretty much, at the very, very tail end of their career by the time that Canelo once, started to hit his actual peak. But I mean, thing is that Canelo Alvarez, he's been fighting professionally for 20 years. And that's what a lot of people overall don't understand. He turned pro at age 15. Terence Bud Crawford, he's a guy that has only been fighting for about 17 years. Canelo's been fighting for about 20. So that's why I say people don't understand when I say that they're going to get emotional. They're going to say, what are you talking about? Crawford is older. Right. Not every career ends up the same. For those of you that know sports, you understand what the hell I'm talking about. Not everyone ages as gracefully as the other. And Canelo Alvarez does have more wear and tear on him between the two fighters. He has a decently better resume than Crawford. It just is what it is. On top of that, he's fought guys that have been legitimately bigger than him in height, reach, and weight. And on top of that, Canelo has been fighting for longer. It just is what it is. So when you talk about the fighters, Canelo and Crawford, although they're both aged and they're not that far off from each other, Canelo is the more aged of the two fighters.
Manny Pacquiao. They're going to have to. They don't have a choice.
And that was another example. Manny Pacquiao lasted till he was about 41 years old, at least in terms of a great fighter. Cotto, for example, he was done at 35.
I'm going to say this, and I'm not just saying it. Terence Crawford could have competed with all those guys.
And that's the reason why you're doing this fight, Crawford, because if you beat Canelo Alvarez, you realize that your name, that your resume, and that your career is never going to be questioned again. At least that it's going to be, very an unlikely chance that it's going to be questioned. That's the main reason why you're doing this.
All of them. I don't see not one fighter that I couldn't compete with. From Roberto Duran to Sugar Ray Robinson. I can't say Sugar Ray Robinson because I didn't see him.
Right.
But the Manny Pacquiao's,
the Hagler, the Hearns.
Hagler was
160. Yeah, he fought it. Yeah.
But I'm talking about those guys around my way.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah.
Even Hagler.
Yeah.
Terence Bud Crawford, I believe, was a big Hagler fan growing up.
I could have competed with.
I believe he was, or maybe that was someone else. I can't remember.
But the guys that was around my way,
Sugar Shane Mosley and all those, yeah.
I compete with all of them. With all of them.
Would have loved to have seen Terence Bud Crawford versus Mosley or De La Hoya or Cotto. In my view, Crawford would have beat both Mosley and De La Hoya. He could have potentially lost to Cotto and De La Hoya because, in my view, when they were at their best or gained more skills as their career went along, they were more skilled than Mosley. I think Crawford would have probably easily outboxed Mosley, just in my view. Mosley was a great boxer, but he was also a guy that did not have a multitude of game plans. He could get outboxed by very good boxers. We've seen it against Cotto and Vernon Forrest and Oscar De La Hoya in the rematch, but it would have been an interesting fight.
Hands down.
Especially if Shane Mosley caught Crawford. We all know that Mosley, of course, he was on PEDs, but, of course, a lot of fighters are, and he could punch.
But back then, Bud, guys fought. I mean, now guys are going to retire with 50 fights. I mean, I think, who was that? Duran at one point was like 78-0. These guys had like 100 fights. Sugar Ray Robinson was like, 200 and
People always bring up this point, and they don't realize that people like Roberto Duran and Chavez and Sugar Ray Robinson, they fought a whole bunch of bums in order to get that record. don't get it twisted. Roberto Duran fought a lot of great 135 pounders. His career, I guess, to be fair, I can't quite comment on as much because he's the one that I've researched the least in terms of his opponents in order to get that many fights. But I guarantee you that there's also a lot of fighters on there that were probably 14-12 and 20-11. There's no way that you're getting over 100 fights and all those fighters are just A-grade level fighters. It never happens. And when you talk about Sugar Ray Robinson and especially Chavez, a lot of those guys, man, they were like club fighters.
200 wins and 5 losses or something.
Well, boxing has evolved.
Agreed.
Because they're fighting every other week.
So when you look at boxing like we was talking about football.
Yes.
Or you can't blindside, crack back and all that stuff.
Yes.
Boxing have evolved to the point where we learned that we don't have to fight so much.
Right. Because there's more money involved, and so you don't have to fight for 10,000, 10,000, 10,000 when guys can make X amount of dollars and fight 1-2 times a year.
Yes.
No.
And then when you look at those fighters that got all those fights, look at their health.
Yeah.
Why would I want to make so much money if I can't enjoy it?
Can't enjoy it. Well, don't know I've made the money.
Facts. And to have somebody steal the money because I don't know what's going on.
Right.
Which is probably what was happening with you when you were signed under Bob Arum, Terrence. But anyway.
Health is wealth.
When did you watch the Charlo fight and Canelo?
Yeah.
Did you watch that fight? Did you take anything?
I was there.
Did you take anything from it?
I felt Charlo just came for a payday.
As do I. And I stated that Charlo pretty much came in there for the money. There was no way that he actually thought he was going to win that fight.
Really?
But I really can't say, but he could have did more.
I say with 99.9999999% certainty, he came in for the paycheck. Every sign that I seen from Jamel Charlo told me that he was coming in for the paycheck. I always state this. Whenever you see a fighter or an athlete that all of a sudden changes their demeanor, when regularly they're very boisterous or regularly they're very calm, and then all of a sudden, they just do a complete, 180 out of nowhere. When it comes down to it, then all of a sudden, that fighter, that they realize that they're a big threat.
Or he did a lot of good things in there that I felt as if he would have know or had the confidence. He would have did way better than what he did.
Do you feel that Charlo could have done more?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, you talking?
As do I. But it wouldn't have mattered. Because to be honest with you, if Jamel Charlo, if he would have tried more, he would have probably gotten knocked out against Canelo. It's no offense, but I've always been saying this. Jamel Charlo, in terms of, fighters of the past several years that were debatably on a top 10 pound-for-pound list, in terms of all-around skill set, he was always the weakest.
Oh, Charlo, yeah. You think he was afraid of Canelo's power?
I do. I think
He was afraid of Canelo Alvarez in general.
he respected too much. I do. But still, all in all, he did what he had to do to make it to the 12th round.
Are you gonna respect? You gonna respect it?
I don't know. We're going to see. I never got hit by him, so I can't say if I am or I am. But I'm...
Well, let me tell you this, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. And Canelo may not have the same amount of power because he is a little bit aged, but he still has A-plus level power. There's no doubt about it in my mind. What I'll state is this. Dimitri Bivol stated that when he got in the ring against Canelo, that Canelo was a harder puncher than even Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez, who now resides at the cruiserweight division. So, Canelo definitely don't punch light. And what I'll also say about Crawford is this. He doesn't have the worst chin that I've seen, but he can be hurt.
Definitely.
Canelo, out of any other all-time great level fighter that I've seen, and I think that both Crawford and Canelo are both all-time great level fighters, Canelo might have the best and the greatest chin that I've ever seen out of any other all-time great level fighter. Like, there's been very few times where I actually have ever seen Canelo Alvarez actually stunned and almost about to drop or super wobbly in a fight. Like, Marvin Hagler, I've even seen Marvin Hagler wobbled in a fight against Tommy Hearns. Canelo, I've seen him a little bit wobbly and a little bit hurt against Gennady Golovkin in the rematch, but it wasn't super obvious. The only one time that I've seen Canelo Alvarez almost about to be dropped was actually against Jose Cotto, I believe Miguel Cotto's older brother. And that was when he was probably 19 years old or something like that.
Respect.
But you gonna make him respect you?
Of course.
Because you got to, because he'll walk you down if you don't.
Agreed.
That's his thing.
He try to walk people down now.
He gonna do what he gonna do, and I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do.
Ooh, I'm gonna be there. I gotta see this. I gotta see this one.
Yeah.
Where are you on the criticism? Man, you've never been punched by anybody like Canelo. You haven't fought a contender. I mean, bro, you just getting. I mean, why do you get to fight Canelo this big payday when you haven't fought anybody leading up to Canelo?
Very simple, because Terence Bud Crawford is one of the bigger boxers in the sport, and he's a guy overall that is an exceptional fighter. It's really not that hard to understand. People always, ask this question about why does this guy get to skip the line, because he offers something that those other contenders don't. I mean, who really is Canelo Alvarez really going to fight at 168 that people really want to see at the current moment in time? Benavidez and Morrell have already moved up. So, I mean, might as well.
You see what he did to Billy Joe, man. Once he hit you, you hear it all, bud. You've heard everything that somebody. I don't know if you've heard it personally, but you got people around you have heard what the criticism is about you taking this fight with Canelo.
And I hope that if Terence Bud Crawford does lose this fight, that he doesn't get hurt like what Billy Joe Saunders got hurt. Now, I'm sure that Billy Joe is well recovered, but, that shit still stays with you. And for those of you that don't remember, Canelo completely smashed in Billy Joe Saunders' eye socket.
That's the joy of it. Nobody knows. That's the excitement.
Mm-hmm.
He's fought all these guys. He's did all these things to these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Terence Crawford is great at a lower weight class, but we don't know Crawford can take the punches in the arms or take the overhand right or the uppercut or the right hand. We don't know. But that's why we fight.
Right.
There's a...
Interesting. It sounds like Terence Bud Crawford does not even completely know if he's going to beat Canelo Alvarez either. What I'll personally state is this. Terence Bud Crawford, I think that he believes that he can beat Canelo, but I also think that he believes that he's going to have almost a flawless performance. It's going to be very interesting to see what Terence Bud Crawford's plan is against Canelo.
A lot of...
And what he does, or, if he has a plan, if he actually gets hurt in that fight. Because if Canelo hits him flush, I have no doubt that Canelo Alvarez is going to hurt Crawford. He may end up like Amir Khan.
What ifs, that a lot of fans is asking, or in their mind, what I can't do.
Right. And the last time he fought somebody that had speed was Floyd. He's never seen anybody with speed like Bud Crawford.
Well, actually, the last time that he fought someone with speed, I mean, there's a lot of fighters that Canelo Alvarez has fought someone with speed. I think what you mean, Shannon, is that the last time that he fought maybe someone of this particular style and someone that had such a great all-around game, or was top 5 pound for pound. I mean, of course, he fought Golovkin, but I don't think Golovkin, all-around skill-wise, was quite on the level of a Crawford or a Floyd. But, I mean, that's pretty much what I would say. I mean, Canelo's fought guys with speed. That's why I just recently mentioned Amir Khan. He also fought Caleb Plant, who's relatively quick. There's probably some other fighters that I'm missing, but anyway.
But, that's why we're going to fight. And then all the answers is going to be answered on fight night.
And if you're Crawford, in my view, you want to retain that speed in that Canelo fight. Because there's no way that you want to go up to 185 on fight night and not have the speed, because that's going to have to be one of your advantages over Canelo. If you don't have foot speed or hand speed over Canelo, and Canelo still looks like what he did against Munguia or Berlanga, I just don't see how Crawford lasts that whole entire fight.
You gonna give him a rematch?
Ain't no rematch in the clause. But who knows?
So you winner take all, hey.
Winner take all. I'm taking it all.
Want to join Club Shay Shay? Becoming a fit.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for that video. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. But very interesting interview by that of Terence Bud Crawford. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later. We'll see where this goes.